Letting Go by Christopher Gorham Calvin. Spoiler warnings. Minor spoilers for Chance Hotel. "He's an ass," Katie said, using her all-too-common matter-of-fact voice. "He's nosy, persistent, and he's probably going to get himself killed." She was seated across from Marvin in his office. A few minutes earlier, she had presented him with a dossier on their latest guest. A dossier which contained a concerning calculation. Marvin remained quiet as he skimmed the details, then clicked his tongue when his eyes landed on the bold percentage at the bottom. "I assume you've double-checked the math," he asked. Katie responded with a defensive tilt of her head. "I had to ask." Marvin tossed the dossier on his desk. "How long do we have?" "It depends how many stupid decisions he makes over the next couple of days. You could have the entire length of his reservation, maybe more if we get creative. Or you could have as little as a few hours. He's predictable, but only to a point." Marvin glanced at the percentage in the dossier once more. It left little room for doubt as to how he needed to proceed, yet it also left him conflicted whether he could. "Thanks for bringing this by. Keep a close watch on the situation. Let me know if anything changes." "I always do, boss." Katie stood, but before leaving, she paused, an uncharacteristic somberness slipping past her normally stone-cold exterior. "For what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong." Marvin smiled at her gesture. "Katie, I can count on a single finger the number of times you've been wrong in all the years we've worked together." His smile shifted to a frown. "We know what's coming. Let's prepare appropriately." Katie nodded, either unable or unwilling to attempt speech. Then she turned and left Marvin alone in his office. The manager replayed his last words to her in his mind, nodding to himself as if trying to convince some part of him that also didn't want it to be true. He picked up the dossier and flipped to the front, where Katie had packaged key details about its subject. Marvin hadn't expected this guest to arrive so soon, even though he'd been managing the hotel for years, and even though he knew from the start that this day would eventually come. He had always told himself it wouldn't be until he was ready. But he wasn't ready. He had hid it far better than the rest of his staff when the guest first stepped up to his counter to check in. But deep down, Marvin was scared. He was scared whether he could go through with the job the hotel now tasked him with. He was scared to potentially lose the staff he had grown to love. He was scared of the unknown, of what came next if he were to do what was expected of him. For a flicker of an instant, the thought to circumvent Katie's predicted path using whatever means necessary crossed through his mind. Marvin pushed the thought away, ashamed he had engaged it, even if for less than a second. He knew firsthand the risks of circumvention. He knew the dark path down which that led. Marvin would never, could never, follow that road. He closed the dossier and threw it in a half-empty desk drawer. He then pushed his chair back, his foot grazing the steel biometric safe that sat in hiding nearby. Marvin eyed the safe with trepidation. He had only opened it once before. So long ago he wasn't even sure he remembered the process. But soon he would open it again and retrieve the contents within. And then... He didn't want to think about it. Despite all the crazy shit he had seen and done during his time in the Chance Hotel, his fear of the unknown weighed on him. He had peered beyond the veil that hung at the border of human existence. He knew there was more to reality than what most people were aware. And yet, when it came to the idea of passing through that veil himself, his stomach churned in protest and his heart fluttered with unease. Marvin closed his eyes and placed a firm palm against his chest, telling himself that it would be okay, that he had nothing to fear. The words failed to comfort, and eventually Marvin chose ignorance over acceptance, simply pushing all thought of the matter from his mind. He left his office and headed to the hotel lobby. It was quiet, and soon his staff would shut it down so they could focus on another important task that awaited them this night. Marvin strolled through slowly, taking in the empty space, a space through which hundreds of thousands of guests had passed on his watch. He ran a hand along one of the plush great room couches, took a deep, smoky breath as he passed the grand fireplace, and closed his eyes so he could fully absorb the sound of his shoes squeaking off the freshly cleaned floor. Marvin reached the concierge podium, where Richard was piddling on the embedded computer to kill time. Upon making eye contact, Richard gave him a shrug that could only be interpreted as, "Sucks, huh?" Marvin continued down the restaurant hallway. Marie greeted him with a forced smile defied by glistening eyes. He placed a warm hand on her arm and squeezed as he walked by, not stopping out of fear that Marie's fresh wave of tears would be contagious. Marvin then entered the restaurant dining room, which was empty save for a couple of stragglers wrapping up their meals. One noticed him and waved, a sign of the cordial relationships he often forged with his guests. Marvin closed his eyes again, this time to take in the calming melody his pianist was effortlessly keying on the grand piano. The melody smoothly shifted into one Marvin instantly recognized. It was the same melody that had been playing during his very first night in the hotel, before accepting the manager job, before his peaks beyond the veil, at a time when life was so much simpler. Or was it? Marvin didn't really know anymore, but nonetheless, the familiar music brought forth a sensation of happiness. Marvin opened his eyes and spotted Chef Terrence watching him from the bar. The chef nodded respectfully, and Marvin responded with his own grateful gesture. Then Terrence resumed tending to the straggling guests. Feeling a little better, Marvin returned to the lobby, stopping to give Marie a tight hug along the way. Katie was making a pre-close assessment of the area as Sam turned down the lights. Marvin caught Sam's eye and gave her a thumbs up, their nonverbal way of communicating that things were okay. Sam's face brightened with relief, and she responded with a thumbs up of her own. Marvin looked back to the concierge podium, where Layla was picking up for the evening. Richard had clearly pulled one of his typical cleaning duty disappearing acts. Layla, or Little Layla, as Marvin still thought of her, was more dutiful. She also had one of the strongest reactions to their newest guest's arrival. She was probably even more scared than him, justifiably so. But she was also strong, and better able to suppress her fear to keep the hotel running smoothly. Her face was focused, but her hands were shaking as she gathered loose paper clips from the podium. It had been a long day, and it was far from over. Marvin's observations of Layla made him realize he couldn't mentally check out on his staff now. With uncertainty looming on the horizon, they needed his management more than ever, and he knew exactly where to begin. Marvin joined Layla at the podium and helped collect the paperclips. He then dumped them into her open palms before clasping his steady hands firmly over hers. Layla, who had been averting his gaze, lifted her eyes to meet his, then swallowed hard, trying her best to mask a trembling lip. Marvin thought about his earlier conversation with Katie, about the facts and probabilities she had given him, and about the consequences they carried for him and his staff. He channeled his inner strength and faced down his lingering fears, accepting that he couldn't control the unknown, and that no matter what future it held for him, he shouldn't let it steal him away from the here and now. He shouldn't let it steal him away from that which mattered most. "Tell me it's going to be okay," Layla choked. If she had asked just a few minutes ago, Marvin wouldn't have been able to fulfill her request. But something had changed since then. He had seen others coming to terms with the changes that lay ahead, and it gave him confidence that he could too. Letting go was hard, but it wasn't hard because of the fear of what followed. It was hard because it meant losing that which had become the core of his being. But now Marvin realized one thing could transcend that loss. It was the love between him and his staff. No matter what changed, no matter where the future took them, they would always have that love, even if they could no longer express it. And that gave Marvin the comfort he needed to proceed. He gave Layla's hand a gentle squeeze as he said, "It's going to be okay." Then his heartbeat strengthened, and a smile formed on his lips as he realized he finally believed it himself.